All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. We are Indy investors talking Indy investing. I am very excited about our show today. I got my good buddy David Lecko on here with me today, and he's a gentleman who has basically built a rental portfolio. He's up to 10 properties now in the last 3 years. And then to help himself out along with it, he built an app to basically help investors as well. So building his rental portfolio while building an app to help himself out. So I like it. It's going to be a good show. And with that, let's get on with the show. All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. I got Mr. David Lecko joining me here today. David, how are you doing, my man?
Couldn't be better. This is the number one way I want to start my weekend off. I love doing these.
There you go. We're like waking up. We're recording this early Saturday morning, so we're like, we're just waking up. We need our coffee. We need stuff like that, but we are ready to go. So. And you just, I want to kind of get into a little bit of your story a little bit, just to start off. So people who don't know you might know a little bit about you, but so you just moved to Indianapolis in 2015 and software developer and stuff like that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey of kind of how you ended up in Indy, kind of how you got here, but then like kind of basically, hey, I want to get into real estate investing and kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I grew up in St. Louis. I went to college in Rolla, Missouri for engineering. And then I was working a regular job in St. Louis. I had this like side project called Chapter Builder. It was for a lot of fraternities and sororities. And it turns out a lot of those headquarters are here in Indianapolis. So I did quit my job and move here. So that way I could be, really close to all of those fraternity headquarters. So it was for work back in 2015.
Nice. That's awesome. So then you just, as you were working then, you were like, you had that itch to, hey, I want to get into real estate investing and that kind of thing, or?
Exactly. Yeah. So the guy who originally bought Chapter Builder from us, he had like 5 rental properties. And so that's what initially kind of turned me on. I was like, oh, this guy is actually successful and he values rental properties. So let me look into it. And I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I started playing the cash flow game. And that's when I realized rental properties offer that predictable cash flow, whereas the investments I had in stocks, like that was going to go up and down, and I really didn't have a lot of control over it. But then the nice thing too was if your rental properties are cash flowing, sometimes you also do get the added benefit of appreciation. So that's just like icing on top. But even if it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter because I'm making that cash flow every month.
Yeah,
that's what was so attractive to me.
Oh yeah. So it's funny. So many people just have that story of like, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, playing the cash flow game, just all those kind of things, and just leading up to kind of where you are now and stuff. So within 3 years, you've basically been able to build a rental portfolio of 10 properties now, which is awesome. And then you build an app to kind of help along to the Deal Machine app. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And I know Ronnie and I even talked about it, on the episode before this one and previewed that and stuff. But so let me ask you this so why did you choose kind of Indianapolis to start your investing in? Was it just because you were here, or then kind of the follow up to that is like, why are you still investing here instead of going to maybe another market?
Well, I knew that cash flow was critical to my strategy. That was because in the cash flow game, if you get something that doesn't cash flow, like sometimes it also doesn't appreciate. So then you're screwed. So I was like, I've got to have good cash flow. And then I knew Indianapolis was a good market for that. And I lived here. So it's the reason why I've continued to stay here. There's no reason for me to go elsewhere because I just want to keep them all together in the same place. And it's a great cash flow market.
Yeah. Now, are you managing all of your properties right now still on your own?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually trying to get to 20. That's the point where I think I can actually hire a full-time like W-2 person to not only just manage the properties, but, help me with XYZ expansion as well.
Okay. Awesome. So let's dig into that a little bit, because that's really good. I actually forgot that you were managing them on your own. So those people that are out there that have those, handful of properties that are managing them on their own, what are some tips that you have for them of like, hey, stay on top of this or be careful of this kind of thing? Yeah.
Make no exceptions when it comes to your rental approvals. So I asked some friends, I was like, what's your approval process? And they said like minimum 600 credit score and your income's got to be 3 times rent. And the very first tenant that I spoke with, or potential candidate, they like didn't meet the 600 score requirement, but they were a really nice person. And I thought, oh, this person like really, means well and would love to help them out by approving them. And they never finished their lease. I think, what had happened was like, one of their boyfriend or whoever that moved in with them, they broke up. And then, she couldn't afford the house by herself anymore. And so I think she like really quickly tried to find another boyfriend, as funny as that sounds, and like get him to move in. And that didn't work out either. But he brought his like big nasty dog, and my house got fleas. And then I was like, I think you need to find a friend that will take you into their, spare room or basement at no charge while you get back on your feet. And so, luckily I didn't have to do an eviction, but I tried to put myself in her shoes and figure out like what's like the actual solution here. It's not me evicting you, right? Like hopefully you'll just go willfully, and I'll like provide some ideas and guidance on how to do that. So that was a pretty awesome like 3-for-1 learning experience about the approval, the eviction or avoiding that, and then also the fleas. So I tried to let a cleaning person actually get rid of it. She was using these things from Walmart, but it just like wasn't working. And so ultimately I had to call professional, and gotten so bad by this point that my house had like 2 months of vacancy, because their treatments have to be every like 20 days and it has to have 3 treatments. So definitely if you've got any bug problems, like I immediately and proactively call the bug person, like the professional bug person.
Has that swayed you at all from going from like hardwood floors to carpet, or from carpet to hardwood floors or anything in some of your rentals? Have you had that like thought process?
That's funny. That house did have carpet in the bedrooms and then hardwood throughout the main part. Now, I would avoid carpet if possible. If I'm doing a renovation, I love to do all the same materials throughout the entire house. I love the vinyl plank. It's a little bit more expensive, but in your kitchen and bathroom, it's actually waterproof. So you are avoiding future pains when something overflows. Your wood's not going to buckle, your laminate's not going to require replacement. So that's my strategy if I'm doing like a total renovation is, yes, I avoid the carpet, and I do spend a little bit more on the vinyl floors just to avoid future maintenance calls.
Yeah. So how much of these, when you're renovating these, rental properties, or you're doing the turnover and anything, how much of this are you doing like by hand? You're out there, you're swinging the hammer and stuff like that,
yeah.
versus like maybe number 1 property versus like number 10 now and stuff. So how's that process been for you of getting contractors and doing it yourself and things?
Gotcha. Okay. So, the actual leasing process, I completely do. Right now, I actually have, I didn't really do much by hand at all. I think actually on that first house, I did go to Home Depot, buy a plastic gutter and replace it. But I actually had to replace it professionally again, like a year later, because, like I don't have I'm pretty good at like stuff, but I just like don't have a truck full of all the tools that I need.
Yeah.
And I just like didn't want to waste time like going back and forth to the store. And plus I was like, my time is worth more with every rental that I have. My time is worth more. And so then it just became way cheaper. Just like have somebody that costs $50 an hour come out and get this done right, and not have to do 10 trips to the hardware store because they've got all the tools in their truck. So the structure I have now is Glenn, my handyman. He's amazing. I pay him like a minimum of a couple $100 per month, and that covers the first 2 maintenance calls. So he's got a lot of skills to go out and do this stuff himself. Anything above that, it's $55 an hour, and he's approved to just go spend, a few hours a month he doesn't have to let me know. He can just charge me. And then he's also allowed to call a specialist if he doesn't feel like going out himself. He loves to. He's kind of like takes pride in that. But if he's got to call a plumber, he'll go ahead, make the call, and then he'll actually show up. Some of those plumbing companies or HVAC companies, they're not super rental friendly, and they'll actually require the owner to be out there in person. But if you've got somebody like Glenn, he can go out there in person. That way I don't have to do that.
Yeah. How did you get connected with Glenn, your handyman, and just,
So he was actually my neighbor in Carmel. The first house that I ever bought, and I house hacked to rented out all the bedrooms. He lived right next door. And so we just stayed in touch, and I forget how we reconnected. I think he saw me on the front lawn one day, and he said like he's interested in quitting his job and he wants to be a full-time general contractor. And he wanted to know if I had any part-time work. So I would say like a repeatable way to find somebody like Glenn would probably be like, go hang out at the hardware store in the morning. I've heard stories of that. Or just hire somebody to do a task. The first thing he did for me was actually renovate a bathroom. So I think that would be my strategy if Glenn decided he didn't want to work for me anymore, was hire somebody to do a job. And if they did a good job, then like continue to, see how far you can push that relationship to work with them more and more and create a structure that like incentivizes you guys both to like continue doing work together.
Yeah, definitely. A couple of things in there I want to kind of unpack a little bit of just that first thing is I think is really good of, your guy, Glenn, he was in that position of like, hey, he was ready to kind of quit his job and start doing this full time. Like I just had an interview with somebody just last week and they were kind of in that same boat and like, they feel like they're the perfect fit because they're like kind of ready to grow, kind of do their own thing. And so when you're looking for, that kind of that handyman for yourself or anything like that, I think that's a really good way to go. Who's that person that's been like on a team for, multiple years, they're leading the team and now they're ready to go out and do their own thing because they're going to be hungry. They're going to be ready to work. So that's always a good place to look. And the second thing you said there too is this is a mindset shift for me because this is the way I was not brought up at all was, hey, why would I pay somebody to go do that when I can do it for, I can just do it on myself. I can just do it by myself. I'm going to be able to do it cheaper and this type of things. But I realized, especially with like a rental property or doing a renovation, if I'm doing a project by myself, it's probably going to take me 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's going to be spaced out. And, during that time, I'm not getting it leased. I'm not getting it, renovated to be able to sell or anything like that. But if you get a professional in there, they can turn around in 2 or 3 days. All of a sudden that money that I thought I was saving, I'm actually paying more for it because, it's a longer process and stuff. So yeah, so good. Some really good tips, David. What are some other things? So you've talked about kind of the some of the, maybe the, mistake you made of the lease, on the leasing of like, oh, they seemed like a good person and they were a nice person things. And then, hanging a gutter on your own, but what are some other tips? Maybe you think back to like those first couple rentals that you had of like, oh man, I wish what I know now, I wish, I knew then. What are some, maybe a big tip that you can kind of remember from that?
Okay. Those were the big ones for me.
Those are the big ones. No, it's all good, man.
I'm trying to think of, there's definitely learning at every step of the way.
Well, let's talk about this. So your newest one that you just got rented out. So this was a bigger property. This was, a higher level property. It's not your average, 3-1 rental, somewhere. This was a bigger one. So what are some mistakes that, or not necessarily mistakes, I mean to say that, but what are some things you learned on, so that bigger value property that you're trying to rent out or things like that? What are some tips that you have on doing something like that?
Yeah. So I just actually moved into this house primarily a year ago, and I paid like $350,000 for it. And my rentals, I like to have, they're bringing in at least 1% of the price that I paid every month. So that would mean this property would have to rent for like $3,500. The reason why I moved out was, my girlfriend and I decided to move in together. And so we moved into a new house together. And so I really didn't want to let that one go because there's a transactional cost every time you purchase real estate. There's a time cost, like I had to spend all that time with the mortgage company, like pulling all these docs. And then I actually did like prepay the interest, some of the interest or, with points, whatever. So like I'm in this house for the long haul and I bought it that way. And it's not worth my time to go try to sell it again. So I was just like, I'm going to rent this, even though it's not my ideal criteria. Like, I feel like I've invested, so much into this already. The easiest thing to do is just going to be to rent it, add it to my portfolio that I want to grow anyway. Well, I rented it for $3,500, and here in Indianapolis, that's just like, there's no houses for rent for $3,500. I don't even think there's one besides mine. And ultimately, I kind of knew that this first go around was going to be some experimentation, but every month I would lower it $500. And I did end up getting it rented out on just as we entered the third month for $2,600. That was actually what I calculated, like the lowest I could go, because I think my mortgage payment may be like 600 with taxes and insurance, 1,600 with insurance and taxes and stuff. So like it was below my 1% rule, but like that's still enough cushion to like fix stuff when it breaks. And the cash on cash return is like I did put I think I put like 5% down and then bought the points as much as possible. So maybe, anyway, it just, that was what I felt comfortable with. Like, right. I calculated ahead of time. I was like, this is the lowest I feel comfortable with. I'll make about $1,000 a month, in income after the mortgage payment. So, yeah, anyway, I would just say like, if you're stick to your, main, like, what am I trying to say? Like I've got like kind of a buy box where I know how to manage these properties. They're all like 1,200 a month or up. So I don't have to usually worry about a ton of evictions as long as I'm really vigilant with my approval process. And also those people aren't frontline workers that are getting, their jobs aren't going away, during COVID, thankfully. Right. I didn't plan that in advance, but like, luckily, I haven't had any issues like that. So that's just kind of like my bread and butter is right there, like a 1,500 square foot ranch that I can rent for 1,200 or a little more. So if you do branch out from your standard, the process is going to change. It's going to take a different amount of time to rent it. You're going to have different issues potentially with the different type of tenant. So that was something like I learned was that took almost 3 months to rent, which is a really long time.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, good tips there. And I think I like what you said, like, hey, generally I'd stick with my buy box and stuff like that. But in this situation, this was a different situation for you. Where like, hey, I can't just sell this because that's not what I want to do. So I need to try to rent this out and try to get some positive cash flow from it and stuff. So yeah, so that's sounding good. I wanted to ask you too. So you're kind of you're just like me. So I moved out here, in 2014. So you came in 2015. Man, what have you seen from Indianapolis and just like the change in just the real estate investing in general, the market, and just the city? It's just, I feel like it's crazy. It's blown up. I feel like there's so many new cool things that I've seen just in the last, 6 years since I've been out here. So what do you think of the city yourself?
I love it. So I grew up in St. Louis, and originally when I moved over here to Indianapolis, which is about 4 hours away, I was just like, oh, it's the same thing. It's the same Midwest city with a racetrack.
That's exactly what I said from Columbus, Ohio. Like, yeah, they're the same city. It's good.
Yeah, but it's not. Like if I go back to St. Louis, which I love doing, there's a lot of nostalgia there for me. My family lives there. I just haven't seen nowhere near like the advancement level that I've seen here. Nobody hangs out downtown St. Louis. Everybody hangs out downtown here in Indianapolis, and it's clean and like it's safe. And we live, very close to downtown now. Plus, I mean, obviously there's great suburbs as well. But I've seen areas like Fountain Square grow since I've been here. When I first moved here, they were saying like, oh, this is an up and coming area. And here we are, 6 years later. And pretty much every house is redone in Fountain Square. They've now pushed back to, Twin Air, which is where my other house was. So I love that the expansion just keeps going and the improvements keep going.
Yeah. So awesome. All right, let's get into a little bit now of, so going back to that, you were working a job, you wanted to try to find your first rental property and stuff like that. And I told a little bit of your story on the episode, before this, of just basically you were driving around writing down addresses and things. And all of a sudden a week later that house sold and you couldn't, you were behind the 8 ball. So you decided to basically develop an app for yourself to be able to find basically investment properties for yourself. Correct?
So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about that, of just kind of what your thought process was of like, hey, this is what I need for myself. This is what I'm going to kind of build. And then kind of that transition of like, oh, wait, I can sell this and other investors can use this. And
yeah. So right away, I started looking after reading Rich Dad Poor Dad and playing that cash flow game. I got out my Zillow app and I started evaluating deals. And so everything that was on Zillow was not going to cash flow. I could calculate that. So I was like, where are all these deals they're talking about? Yeah. And so I went to a local real estate meetup and I met a ton of wholesalers, and they told me, they find a lot of their deals by driving for dollars. And that was what they suggested for me, which is where you go and you look for rundown properties, and then you look up the owners and you get in touch with the owners. So I started doing that after work, about 3 weeks. Every evening I'd spend like 30 minutes or an hour driving around, and I had this list that I was building up. I couldn't send out any mail because at the time, especially, you couldn't send out like one piece of mail. You had to use a company that would do a minimum of 200. So I was working on building my list up. And in that time, I actually missed out on a deal because somebody else had bought it and started renovating it first before I sent mail out. And I drove by again and saw that, and I looked it up on the county records, and sure enough, like it just changed hands. So I was like, oh shoot, I'm not doing my follow-ups correctly. So I went home and I started handwriting letters, which was really, really time consuming, and it wasn't a lot of fun either. So that's when as a software developer, I was like, I know about these companies that will send mail for you kind of programmatically. And I know there's like a map library I could build into this app. So I built a very quick tool for myself, had a map, I could pin a property. It would send a VA a task to look up the address. They'd put it in there, and then the mail would be sent off. And that's what solved my follow-up problem. But that's ultimately what became Deal Machine later on. But just originally, it was just for me trying to solve that problem, following up. And it was a process that everybody already agreed was like, this is a good way to find discounted properties.
Yeah. So I just love that about your story too. Just like, yeah, well, this is what I needed. So I just built myself an app. Like I love that. It's so cool. And like, I remember the first time, we talked, we met at AREA and kind of started talking, and you started telling me about what you had. And I was like, wait a second. What? Tell me this again. Like, that is awesome. Yeah. 100%. Yes, I can use this. And I think that first year we added like 14,000 properties with your app and stuff. So it was great. So what, how could, let's kind of think of this as somebody, whether somebody maybe here local in Indianapolis, or maybe they're out of state. So maybe they're in California or Seattle or, Colorado or anything like that. How could they use Deal Machine to kind of help them out on, one of the biggest things, like you said, is, there's companies that have to do, the mass mailers, like our mailers, when we send them out, it's like 25,000 mailers. Like, when you're able to do one-offs through Deal Machine and things like that, which is great, and skip trace and things. So what are some other ways that you kind of really think that somebody sitting in Colorado right now is able to use Deal Machine to be able to find deals, to help themselves out, and really just build their rental portfolio that they need?
Yeah. So you could actually hire somebody on the ground here to drive and look for those distressed properties for you. I would suggest running an ad on Indeed. You could call all Uber drivers and Lyft drivers that want a more consistent pay, because here in Indianapolis, they can't make 20 an hour every hour they're driving. We just don't have the traffic that supports that at all hours of the day. So if they would drive for you for 15 or 20 an hour, say, you can guarantee them that rate, and but they can still work whenever they want. And basically, my goal is to find one driver that wants to do like 20 hours a week or more, and have him look for distressed properties in areas where the properties actually have like value. So yeah, you don't want him to drive in an area where you can't make any money. So that would be my suggestion. But also, I don't know if you know this, Brian, but we actually came out with Deal Machine List Engine, which is like a slightly different product in the same app that lets you, pull a leads list. So
I did not know that yet, but I'm very excited about that now.
Awesome. Yeah. So some advantages there. Obviously, you can't buy a list of distressed properties, but there's definitely other instances where you'd want to pull a list. And so the way we've structured it, for like the basic plan of even like $30, you can actually pull every house in Indianapolis and get that list if you want. You get one list type for that $30 a month, and it'll refresh based on your criteria as houses meet that or maybe don't meet that. Let's say if they were sold recently. And if you want to pull like two different types of lists, I think that's $50 a month. And unlimited is maybe like 100 or 150. I'll have to double check that. But that's a brand new thing that provides a ton of value because you can pull an unlimited number of actual properties, and people have done that. They've added entire cities. I don't think I would recommend that, but just an example of like, how much value you can pull out of it.
Yeah, that's what I was just talking to an investor. He was down in the Tampa market. And he was just like, "Oh, I just mailed the whole city because I just wanted to get everybody that first one and stuff." I'm like, "Oh my
That's
gosh."
so much money. You've
Yeah.
definitely got to,
Yeah.
that's why driving for dollars is so valuable, is because compared to a list that you'd buy you're actually spending, you have to find way less properties. And that means you're spending way less mail because it's so targeted.
Yeah.
Is that what you
So
guys have seen too? Or what's your primary way of finding properties?
So we hire data scientists to find our list, to do
Oh, okay.
our list and stuff like that. So that's one of the things. But I mean, that's our other list. Our other list comes from Deal Machine. So we've hired drivers to go out and basically find niche lists of like, hey, I'm looking at the Christian Park neighborhood. Like, I want properties that look like this, or that are in this condition. And then all of a sudden, I have a
Mm-hmm.
list built for Christian Park, and then I'll do the same thing for Twin Air, and then Bozart Brown, and just that's how we're building our list and things like that. So we have somebody on our team that's dedicated to doing that for us. So. Yeah.
Amazing.
So no, awesome stuff. And like, just if you're kind of thinking like, how well does this really, like, David is literally seeing that, like the company is blown up. So that's one thing, but he has seen this happen in every market, around the nation. So you're saying like, oh, is this, this mainly works in like New York or Chicago? No, it works in like a bunch of even smaller markets than Indianapolis and stuff too, where people have, hire drivers to go out there and find the properties that they need to, whether it's part-time, full-time. I know we pay like kind of by the house. Some people pay by the hour. So those things are all working and stuff. So, David, as we're running out of time here, let me kind of get just a couple more, or just like maybe one more tip, or just some advice from you, whether it's on even just building your rental portfolio here in Indianapolis, or how you can use Deal Machine to kind of help yourself out for that process. You got one last little words of wisdom for us?
Yeah. So early on, if you're doing construction, definitely check their work, or hire somebody you trust to check their work, because I had somebody pull in this like PEX piping through some concrete in one of my houses. And for 2 years, it kind of had like a slow water fountain spurt underneath. And then like the entire, flooring was totally, what do you call that? Like disintegrated, moldy.
Yeah. Oh, ouch.
So like that was, I thought I was getting a great deal on a contractor, and I just didn't like check that work to that level, and that really cost me. So I think one thing that I've learned is, definitely there are ways to save money, but you really want to be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to managing rental properties, because the cost is always more if you're having to be reactive.
So awesome, David. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If somebody wants to find out more about you or about Deal Machine, where can they go?
Yeah, so dealmachine.com is our website. And then my Instagram is Lecko. So you can find me there and connect with me there.
So awesome stuff. Appreciate you so much, brother. And with that, we are going to get out of here. And that's another episode of the Indy Investor Pod, where Indy investors talking Indy investing. Take care.
Thank you, man.